All right, so today we're going to talk about antibiotic resistance and pesticide resistance, and they are exactly what they say they are. So the first thing we're going to go through is antibiotic resistance, and then once we finish with today's lecture, we're going to see this and physically do it with the lab that you partially see in front of you. Okay, so up here you see a case study on antibiotic resistance. So what we need to know, and this somewhat relates to what we are seeing now with COVID, with the coronavirus. So bacteria reproduce super quickly, okay? So if you were to put bacteria, you were in a lab and you put bacteria into a petri dish, those bacteria multiply like wildfire. So because they evolve, that is why they are able to reproduce so rapidly. So they, in turn, develop what is known as resistance. And they develop resistance especially to antibiotics. So we take antibiotics when we're sick, right? When we have some type of bacterial infection, because antibiotics are not meant for viral infections. When we have a virus has to run its course. So if you have something like the stomach bug, you just kind of gotta let whatever happens happen, okay? And then eventually we feel better. But with a bacterial infections can get worse. So we take antibiotics for a bacterial infection. So knowing what an antibiotic is and then knowing what resistance is, we're able to put together what antibiotic resistance is. So when we talk about the word resistance, we're talking about when something stops working. So antibiotic resistance would mean that antibiotics no longer work. And we're going to talk about how this happens and ways that we can prevent this from happening. So the other day in notes, you would have seen what evolution requires. And there are 4 things that evolution requires. Visit minus the I. So it requires variation, okay? It requires selection, inheritance, and time. Because from day 1 with evolution, we've been talking about how we don't, or things don't evolve in a day, or a week, or a month, or a year, or 10 years, or 50 years, okay? It happens over long periods of time. So many, many years and many, many generations have to go by. So you're going to see how this works through what is required for evolution to occur. So first is variation. So when we talk about variation, we're talking about a variety of things. So up on the board, you see 2 different types of bacteria. Okay, so we have our purple bacteria, which are our normal bacteria, normal population of bacteria. And then you see the red, which represent the mutant bacteria. So that means that there's some type of mutation that occurred. So the mutant bacteria are going to be the ones that are not affected by the antibiotic. So the reason that they are not affected is because they have greater fitness. Now we've talked about fitness, right? Fitness is not what we do in the gym. Fitness is what? Who remembers? Okay, so it deals with adapting. So fitness is being able to survive to a reproductive age and eventually being able to reproduce, okay? So essentially, those that are better adapted are going to be the ones that are able to do that, right? So these mutated bacteria have a greater fitness, so therefore, they are more likely to survive that antibiotic. So, over time, what's happening? We take the antibiotic. It's killing off most of the germs. It's killing off those bacteria, right? So over time, they're going away. Now, when we get to the inheritance piece, the mutated bacteria reproduce more and more, and then they pass on their resistance genes. So these red mutated bacteria are now going to reproduce. So every time they reproduce, they're doubling, okay? But we still have this regular bacteria here. So this regular bacteria is still going to do the same thing. It's still going to reproduce, okay? But these mutant bacteria, there's more, so we're eventually going to see what? More of the mutated bacteria, okay? So over time, we're doubling, okay? Now, we're going to apply an antibiotic again. What's going to happen? Kill as many what? Which ones? Okay, so over time, it kills the bacteria, the regular bacteria, but it doesn't kill those mutant bacteria because those mutant bacteria have developed a resistance to that antibiotic. Everybody follow me so far? So now, those multiply again, and now we have all this or these mutant bacteria, but then we only have a few of that other bacteria, that regular bacteria. So we're going to talk about how this actually happens in our day-to-day lives. So there are a few things antibiotic resistance is caused by. And the first of these is overprescription of antibiotics. And what I mean by that is that you take an antibiotic every time you're sick. Every time you're sick, do you really need an antibiotic? No, okay? So if you have the common cold, do you really need an antibiotic? No, okay? You might be able to take something over the counter. But if you have strep throat or you have an upper respiratory infection, might we need an antibiotic? Yes, okay? Well, if you have the common cold and you are the individual who calls the doctor every time and says, hey doc, I don't feel good, I need an antibiotic. Either you go in and get seen, or sometimes doctors prescribe stuff over the phone to the pharmacy, right? Well, if you didn't really need it and you took that antibiotic and you continued to do that in some type of cycle, months down the line, you get strep throat, you call the doctor, you go in, you get swabbed, you get seen, you need an antibiotic. Well, you just took this antibiotic how many times, and you didn't really need to take it. What happened this whole time? Build up resistance. So you built up resistance to this antibiotic. Now you really need it, and what might happen? It's not going to work, okay? So there's not just one antibiotic. There are all kinds of antibiotics out there, and they are all used to treat different types of bacterial infections because there's not just one type of bacteria either, okay? But there are certain antibiotics out there that are used for widespread, all kinds of bacteria. Another one, and this is a big one, okay, is your failure to finish a prescription. So, I know earlier today, some of my students didn't know, but has anybody ever heard of a Z-Pak? No, okay. How about penicillin? All right, so penicillin, we're gonna go with penicillin. So you get sick, doctor prescribes you an antibiotic, happens to be penicillin. He prescribes you 2 tablets a day for 10 days. Day 5, day 6, you're starting to feel pretty good. You're like, I don't need the rest of these pills. What happens? So you didn't kill off all the bacteria, and now they can build up a resistance to this antibiotic, and so now those bacteria are going to multiply. So now you might get sick a week later because you never killed off the entire infection, okay? And then a third one is the overuse of antibiotics in the meat industry. And we've kind of talked a little bit about this back when we were in biotechnology, and we talked about how different animals that we eventually eat are injected with different steroids, hormones, antibiotics. Okay, so this does happen in the meat industry much too often. So the reason that this is a problem, which I've already touched on, okay, if you get sick with resistant bacteria, you're eventually not going to be able to treat it with antibiotics because you built up that resistance. Okay, so now it's not going to work anymore. Another one, okay, so strep throat is one example. Another one is MRSA. Has anybody ever heard of MRSA? A staph infection. Yes? So a lot of times this is something, I mean, it happens outside of, but a lot of times you can get these in the hospital. So they typically start as this small red bump that looks like a pimple. They also look similar to a boil or a spider bite, if anybody's ever been bitten by a spider or bit by a spider. So same thing can happen here. So if we needed to treat this, but we already built up this immunity or this resistance to an antibiotic, when we really need to treat it, it's not going to work. Okay, here's just another picture because MRSA can spread, and it can spread very, very quickly. This just shows us a graph of what antibiotic resistance looks like in different types of infections and what happens over time. So what do you see in all of these over time? They're all growing, right? So you see that all of these different types of infections, okay, have some type of antibiotic resistance, and they are on the rise, okay? So what can we do to prevent this? Doctors can prescribe fewer antibiotics. So if you don't really need it, they don't need to prescribe it. And you should always, no matter what, finish all of your medication, unless obviously you have side effects and you call the doctor and they give you something else, okay? But you should always finish medication. All right, now we're gonna jump ship to case study 2. We're gonna go through this one a little bit quicker because it's essentially the same thing, but instead of talking about antibiotics, we're talking about pesticides. Okay, so we need to know what a pesticide is and what pesticide resistance is. So pesticides are used to kill insects. So farmers use these, right, when they're growing crops. Okay, pesticide resistance occurs when insects are no longer affected by that pesticide. So essentially the same thing's happening, but instead of antibiotics in the meat industry or for humans, okay, the same thing's happening for insects or pests. So why is this a problem? Well, obviously, insects can cause damage to crops. So farmers grow all these crops, and if they're not sprayed with pesticides, then they're going to get damaged by these insects. Another one is that it can spread disease. So the big one that we're going to talk about today is bed bugs, which gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it. Okay? So we're going to see this just like we saw for antibiotic resistance. So we're going to go through variation, selection, inheritance, and time. So first we have a few mutated bed bugs. So like I said, it's going to work and look just like antibiotic resistance. So here, your black ones are your normal bed bugs, okay? And the red one is your mutated bed bug. So we are going to see what happened over time. Once we use a pesticide, what's going to happen? The black ones are going to die off, and what's going to happen to the mutated one? It's going to grow because it's going to continuously keep reproducing, right? So in comes our pesticide, okay? Away go the normal black bed bugs, and then eventually, over time, they are going to mutate. So then we come in again, we use a pesticide again, okay? Kills off the majority of the normal bed bugs, and then the mutated ones are still living, so therefore they are going to continuously keep reproducing, okay? So what can we do about this? Farmers can use fewer pesticides, and or they can rotate the pesticides they use. So just like antibiotics, there's a variety of pesticides, so they can rotate the pesticides that they use so that maybe the insects don't become resistant to a specific one, okay? The second thing is that we, as consumers, can buy organic, and we talked about this. Organic versus GMO when we go to the grocery store, right? So organic means what? It's completely natural. Nothing was added to it. No pesticides were sprayed on it, okay? So it is completely natural. Whereas something that we buy that's GMO is the complete opposite. So it could have been sprayed with pesticides, or things could have been added to it. Does anybody have any questions?